Hello and welcome back to this series dedicated to the crazy Orlando Furioso. Today we're going to read together Canto number 15, which is a really gorgeous, glorious, beautiful canto. One of my favorites so far, I have to say. It's pretty long at 105 stanzas. We have to say though that originally it was about 75, 78 stanzas, and then in his revision phase Ariosto added so many more stanzas. I will highlight exactly where in the canto he added the new stanzas that were published with the 1532 edition. One of the reasons why I like Canto 15 so much is probably because it takes me back to when I studied history at school, in particular colonialism and the origin of colonialism. So the first ones were in the 15th century, the Portuguese, that with a very strong fleet went out around the globe. And I believe in 1415 we can date the beginning of real Portuguese colonial expansion. The Spanish colonial expansion started almost a century later with the discovery of America by Colombo in 1492. In fact, in the Barbara Reynolds translation, which is this one, in the beginning of Canto 15, we have a really useful map actually of Astolfo's journey that I'm going to show here as an image. From the island of Formosa, which is modern Taiwan, until Cairo and the Holy Land. That's where at the end of the canto Astolfo and his gang will find themselves. And what I really find fascinating is not as much the history of colonialism in itself, but I love to try and make the effort, intellectual effort, to imagine what the world, everything, the world geography, the global reality appeared and how it was imagined by people in a Ferrara court in Italy, by Ariosto and the court of Estensi, because they didn't have a chance to travel to Formosa, to Taiwan, to all the Portuguese colonies. So what kind of idea did they have about all these faraway lands that they heard about? In this canto we can hear the international, the global breadth of a poem like Orlando Furioso. The canto begins strongly with Ariosto speaking directly to his lord and reminding his lords of the Estensi of their victory in the Battle of Polesella. This is a battle that had been fought in 1509, in which the Estensi won over the Venetians, and it was a very clear victory. This is why Ariosto is talking about many different types of victories, some won by virtue, some won by luck, and some with the ability to save a lot of the lives of your own army, which is exactly what his lord was able to do in the Battle of Polesella. Then we go back to where the action has been left in the previous canto of the Siege of Paris, where Rodomonte has been entering the first line of walls of Paris, but all of the Saracen army has fallen in this space between the first and second line of walls, and they've been all burned alive, something like 11,000 people, 11,000 soldiers burned, while Rodomonte has been able to run through and jump on the second tower, which is in the inside line of walls. And so Ariosto is saying, well, if in order to do that you had to lose 11,000 soldiers, what kind of a victory is that? And in fact, to be clear, this is not a victory yet, because the battle continues. We're going to see more of it later on in the poem. Then, after stanza number 9, we meet again with Astolfo. Astolfo is a very important character in Orlando Furioso. We'll see later on why as well, but he has a really prominent place in terms of the secondary characters of the entire poem. We find him again after his long exile, which has been an exile because he had been transformed into a myrtle tree by Alcina. And so he's been, as a myrtle tree, he's been in exile on Alcina's island, Logistilla and Alcina's island, until Ruggiero came and defeated Alcina. Now he's still there in Logistilla's palace, and Logistilla is giving him the instructions on how to make the journey back home. Not only that, but she's also giving him some gifts, some very important gifts that are going to be seen in this canto. In particular, two of them. One is a book of spells, a book of, in fact, a book to fight spells, to fight negative, evil spells. And the other one is a magic horn that whoever blows into this horn is going to have all his enemies around him run away. Logistilla wants that Astolfo is accompanied by Andronica and Sofrosina. They are two of these ladies that we already encountered who are allegories or stand-ins for particular cardinal virtues. And Andronica stands for fortitude or for strength, and Sofrosina for temperance. We remember them because Ruggiero met them as soon as he arrived to Logistilla's palace. Now here we can find the interpolation that I was alluding to in the beginning of the video. From stanza 18 until stanza 36 included, 36, these are all new stanzas that Ariosto showed and wrote only within the edition published in 1532. So in the first edition of Orlando Furioso, they were not present. They are beautiful stanzas because they talk about the geography, like I was mentioning in the beginning, geography that was known at the time in the Italian courts, in the European courts, by courtesans, by people like Ariosto, intellectuals, and it's so interesting and fascinating to dive in that particular world. In fact, at the end of stanza 16, Ariosto mentions La Terra di Tommaso, or the land of Thomas. What is he referring to here? He's referring to the land of Saint Thomas, Saint Thomas the Apostle, who in the legend, in the ancient history, was believed to have gone to Indochina and there lost his life as a martyr. And so the Indochina area is called, even if it's a little bit broad, was called Land of Thomas. Then at the beginning of stanza 17, Ariosto mentions the peninsula of Chersoneso in Italian, in the Italian version, which is Malacca. And Malacca was conquered by the Portuguese in 1511. Then Astolfo and his ships are sailing all along the coast of India, south and then up, and going down south towards the south, they meet the island of Ceylon, or the current Sri Lanka. Astolfo decides to ask Andronica about the world. So Andronica starts describing what is really a fascinating description of the world in Ariosto's times, and then she launches into a prophecy. Because of course we have to remember always in Orlando Furioso's times, we are in the times of Charlemagne, and therefore something like 700 years before, 7 centuries before the times of Christopher Columbus and all these discoveries. In fact, this is why in stanza number 24, Andronica says né che la prima si sappia che la sesta e la settima età passata sia. In other words, it's going to be in 6 or 7 centuries that these great discoverers and sailors will discover these lands. So Andronica mentions some of these explorers. She alludes to them who will come in the future. This is why she is talking in the sense of a prophecy. And the first one that she is alluding to is Vasco da Gama, because she says in stanza number 22, e ritrovar del lungo tratto il fine, che questo fa parer due mar diversi, e scorrer tutti i liti e le vicine, isole d'Indi, d'Arabi e di Persi. This is in fact an allusion to the circumnavigation of Africa done by Vasco da Gama in the year 1497. Then it's the time of Christopher Columbus, Italian, who is in the second half of stanza 22, where Andronica says, altri lasciar le destre e le mancine, rive che due per opera erculea fersi, e del sole imitando il camin tondo, ritrovar nuove terre e nuovo mondo. Nuovo mondo in Italian means new world. So Columbus discovered the new world, and this was in 1492. Then in stanza 23, Andronica talks about the colonization of Central America, and she alludes to the fact that the explorer Cortés planted the flag of Charles V in Mexico. What follows then is a celebration of the Emperor Charles V, and one particular character of Italian history, Andrea Doria. And who was Andrea Doria? Andrea Doria was an admiral who had become famous because he had been hunting and defeating a lot of pirates in the waters of the Mediterranean Sea, and also a statesman from Genoa during the times of the Republic of Genoa. So a very important figure or character in Italian history. Meanwhile, Astolfo and his expedition has gone through the Persian Gulf, and he's landed in Saudi Arabia, what is today Saudi Arabia, but was called back then the Arabia Felice, or Happy Arabia. And then he hops on his incredible horse Rabbicano, and he starts riding Rabbicano along the river Traiano. What is this river Traiano? This river Traiano was an artificial channel that was built by the Egyptian kings to connect the river Nile with the Red Sea. And I really love the description of this horse, Rabbicano, that Ariosto does in stanza number 40. Here it is. Su quel destrier ch'al mondo è senza pare, che tanto leggermente e corre e valca, che nell'arena l'orma non appare. L'erba non pur la nieve calca, coi piedi asciutti andar potria sul mare. Here is where Astolfo hears from an old hermit on a ship about the presence of a very dangerous, terrible giant not far from where they are, whose behavior is very graphically described in stanza number 45. E con gran risa, avviluppati in quella, se li trascina sotto il suo coperto, né cavalier riguarda né donzella, o sia di grande o sia di picciol merto, e mangiata la carne e le cervella, succhiate il sangue, dà l'ossa al deserto, e delle umane pelli intorno intorno, fa il suo palazzo orribilmente adorno. The name of this giant is Caligorante, and he's using some kind of a magic net. It's not magic because it comes from the classical myths, in particular Homer and the Greek myths, because in stanza 56, Ariosto mentions that this net had been created by Vulcan, the god Vulcan. And it had been created, in fact, to tie up Venus and Mars. And then he had just remained there until this giant Caligorante had stolen it and used it for himself. Now, thanks to his magic horn, Astolfo is able to defeat the giant Caligorante, and he parades him around in Cairo. There is a gorgeous illustration among the various illustrations that Gustave Doré drew for this particular Canto 15. Probably the best one is this illustration of Astolfo parading the giant around Cairo with all the people of the town running around him, with little kids running and the crowd opening, and just seeing this miraculous event. Somebody has finally defeated this terrible giant. Now, while Astolfo is still thinking what to do with this giant, there is another giant that enters the story. In fact, this other giant's name is Orillo, and two knights, and this other giant and these two knights in fact come from Boiardo. They were already described in Orlando Innamorato, in the previous work that Orlando Furioso is continuing. And so what Ariosto does here is, in a few stanzas, he summarizes all the story, the backstory that has happened. These two particular knights are now fighting the giant Orillo. In this moment, Astolfo meets them and offers to join them in a battle against Orillo. The problem with giant Orillo, which is quite funny actually, is that he's got some magic powers too. It's almost a little similar to the Marvel universe here. Everybody's got some special powers. The giant Orillo is able to regrow every part of his body, every limb that is chopped off. So you cannot really kill him by simply cutting parts of his body, because they regrow. There is an excellent stanza that I love in Italian, I'm going to read to you, is stanza number 82. It goes like this. Or cader gli fa il pugno con la mazza, or l'uno or l'altro braccio con la mano, quando taglia attraverso la corazza e quando il va troncando a brano, Ma ricogliendo sempre della piazza, va le sue membra a Orillo e si fa sano. Se in 100 pezzi ben l'avesse fatto, redintegrarsi il vedea Astolfo a un tratto. Now, in his magic book, his special book of spells, Astolfo reads that in order to defeat Orillo, you have to simply cut one piece of hair out of his head. That is a specific piece of hair. The book doesn't say which one. So what Astolfo does, he chops the giant's head off and brings it away with him. There is a beautiful illustration by Gustave Doré of this particular scene as well, of Astolfo riding away, holding the big head of Orillo, while the headless body of Orillo is chasing them because he wants his head back. Then, by holding the head by the nose and using his sword as a razor, he cuts all the hair from the head, and randomly he also cuts the right piece of hair, therefore defeating and killing finally Orillo. Finally, Astolfo decides to gift the giant Caligorante to a nobleman that he finds along his way called Sansonetto. Astolfo and the two knights arrive in the Holy Land. There are beautiful descriptions of the Holy Land. And in this moment, Grifone, who is one of these two knights, hears from a Greek traveler about a woman that he's always loved, that he's in love with, even if she's a terrible woman. This Greek traveler tells him that she is in a nearby place. So Grifone, without telling anything to anybody, including his brother, he sneaks away. He goes and rides away towards this woman to seek revenge against the men who took her away from him. But, as Ariosto says, this one is another story for Canto 16. Thank you so much for following this video.